Kia ora, I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Today on The Detail, the spine-tingling act that made our youngest MP world famous has turned into a political standoff.
This is a very serious matter. We take it very seriously. The consequences can be very serious for members of Parliament. We think, as a committee, that we need to give one further chance because we do not want to have anybody under any illusions as to just how serious this is.
What we're confronting with here is the domination of one side of the House, the domination of one culture consistently dismissing the Māori view, Māori tikanga view.
Today, I talked to former politicians and a tikanga expert about how and why the rules need to change.
There's a bit of give and take here. You don't just throw all of our institutions and their traditions out the door because you don't like them.
What harm is there in this allowance of Māori tikanga to take place in the Parliament of this land, of whom Māori are tangata whenua?
If we continue to see Parliament excluding Māori ways of doing things, excluding concerns about Māori rights, that I think is concerning.
It all started in November at the first reading of the Treaty Principles Bill. 3 Te Pāti Māori MPs and Labour's Peeni Henare took part in a haka during the vote. Complaints were lodged with the Speaker about their behaviour, who then referred them to the Privileges Committee. Peeni Henare was the first to appear before the committee, but Te Pāti Māori MPs refused. Here's co-leader Rawiri Waititi.
We're not sorry. Would we do it again? In a heartbeat. Because this is who we are. This is not about a silly little Privileges Committee and their silly little rules. It's bigger than that. This is about us standing up in the contest between the dominating culture that Te Māori has to contend with.
They've been given a last chance to appear before the committee on April the 23rd, but they say they're going to have their own independent hearing. Former MP Peter Dunn was a member of the Privileges Committee. He says there needs to be some give and take before it all disintegrates.
The issue here seems to be that what the MPs did was not so much the haka, but it was the fact that they did the haka while a vote was in process. And that was disrupting the procedures and the practices of the House and allegedly intimidating people during the voting process. I think that's the sort of the crux of the, if you like, the theoretical issue here. But this has turned into something else now.
What do you mean by that? It's turned into something else?
It's not really about that particular issue anymore. This is an issue about, if you like, Māori tikanga versus the parliamentary protocol and where those two fit. There's got to be a meeting point, where that meeting point is, or is there no meeting point and one prevails over the other? And I think that's the debate that's flowing around at the moment. From what the Māori Party is saying, it would appear to be a case of them saying that their traditions are more important than the parliamentary traditions. Parliament's saying, actually, it's the other way around. And I think that this Privileges Committee hearing is going to be more about that than actually what happened on that particular day last year.
So are you saying that doing the haka isn't the problem? Because haka has been done before in Parliament, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. But the issue here is when it was done. It was done during a vote while a vote was underway. And there have been haka done before on many occasions, but always at the conclusion of a proceeding, not sort of halfway through it. But since then, of course, you've got this whole secondary issue of Te Pāti Māori saying, well, effectively, we don't recognise the jurisdiction of the Privileges Committee, which raises some bigger issues about, well, given that the Privileges Committee is Parliament's creation, are you by implication saying, or by extension saying, that you don't really recognise the authority of Parliament either? And that's, I think, where there's going to be some interesting debate.
What I read of it was that they left their seats to do the haka and they went onto the floor. But are you saying that that's not the issue, it's the fact that they disrupted the vote?
That appears to be the technical issue. Now you can look at the theatrics around that, if you like, the fact that they were on the floor, that they were directly, literally in the face of David Seymour. There's a whole sort of another secondary tier to this of whether that was just sort of good haka practice or blatant intimidation. And the Privileges Committee, which is there to uphold, in rather quaint language, the rights and privileges of the House, which effectively come down to the rights of members of Parliament to speak freely without harassment, the right and state their opinions, whatever they may be. That's why we have this whole concept of parliamentary privilege, and what you say in Parliament is protected even if it's libelous to someone. So there's that issue of has parliamentary privilege been offended in that sense? And then the secondary issue of the authority of the House to regulate its own business, has that been offended by the way in which they acted on this occasion?
The other thing, though, is that Te Pāti Māori MPs wanted to attend that committee together, the three of them, and with someone who was an expert in tikanga, who could argue their case. The Privileges Committee said no, they had to attend separately. What would be wrong with them appearing together if it meant that this could be resolved?
Well, I think that's a very good question. I can't see why they couldn't appear together. They've all been charged, if you like, with the same offence. So rather than have sort of three separate hearings, which is what the Privileges Committee seemed to be suggesting, I would have thought the more prudent way in the circumstances would have been to have taken the whole case as one and dealt with all of the issues at the same time. I've sat on the Privileges Committee over the years, and we've certainly allowed people the right to have a legal representative on their behalf or be there to assist them. So I don't quite know what all that was about either. And it seems to me that in the circumstances, that could have been seen as almost an inflammatory action on the part of the Privileges Committee. Which I think was unfortunate.
So you have been a member of the Privileges Committee. What's it like? The language that is used, I mean, you can be in contempt of the rules or the committee or both even. I mean, it sounds a bit like a court.
It's contempt. It is a court in effect, contempt of the House. The Privileges Committee's got extraordinary powers. I mean, theoretically, it could imprison people if it found them guilty of whatever they were charged with. There's only a slight technical problem because I remember when I was on it at one stage, we actually considered this very briefly for someone in a sort of an exemplary way, and the clerk of the House said, well, the problem is they have to be imprisoned within the parliamentary precinct, and we have nowhere to do that. But it can fine them. So in the case of MPs, it can suspend them from the House, which means they lose salary, they lose their allowances and all of those sort of things for the period of their suspension. It can fine them in contempt. But when it makes a ruling, that then goes back to the House to vote on. And normally a Privileges Committee report is debated and its ruling accepted. But I recall one occasion, for instance, where the House found Winston Peters in contempt and the Privileges Committee ruling was upheld, and his response at the end of it was, well, so what? I'm not apologising, I'm not doing anything. At which point the Privileges Committee looks a bit like a toothless tiger.
So it was taken no further?
No further, no. And there's no capacity for that to happen unless a sort of a fresh case of privileges raised, which no one had any great appetite for. So in this instance, I think the committee will be looking to reach a judgment that sends some signals about the parameters of acceptable behaviour for the future. We'll make I suspect, some sort of ritual bow in favour of how you respect a tikanga and how you try and incorporate more practices related to that within its work. But I'm not expecting this to be a definitive sort of once and forever ruling.
If you want to know who it was that they tried to imprison, stay tuned. But let's hear now from Te Ururoa Flavel.
Why the big deal now? Simply because they were standing up to the ACT Party about the piece of legislation. You know, other MPs have yelled across the House in the past, close to the tones of a haka, but they did it in English. Nobody got stood down for that sort of stuff.
He's a former minister and Māori Party co-leader, and he says it's not the first time Parliament has seen a challenge like this from Māori MPs, and it won't be the last.
Yeah, I think it's probably inevitable, simply because even in my time as one of the first MPs under the Māori Party banner, we continually tested, I suppose, Parliament rules because they're so Eurocentric. They're so unable to adapt and cope with a new Aotearoa that at least acknowledges Māori tikanga how things can be carried out. Yes, there have been minor changes here and there from the time that I first went into Parliament, all off the back of us just going about and doing what we believed as being tikanga in the House of Parliament. But it's always come with some challenges.
I spoke to another former Māori MP. He described to me what the House is like, and he says there's basically nothing there that says that Māori people work here. There is physically nothing in the House. Not only is there nothing in the kind of the processes, there might be the odd prayer in Māori, but that's about it. What was your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing. And that's why we tested it all the time from, the simple things of that when I first started, translations of Te Reo Māori speeches in the House. It was all done, a stop-start affair. People didn't want to do it, and we finally moved to have an earpiece provided to all members such that we could freely speak Te Reo Māori. There was the welcoming of new MPs, just a simple thing like standing up and saying in Māori, as we did, just a welcome to all of the MPs as they returned to the House after an election. And that seemed to be challenged along the way. From time to time, we challenged the rules, but there's so many inconsistencies. But if the corridor from the other MP says that there was not too much there at all that reflected kaupapa Māori, then I think that's a fair summation of my experience.
Te Pāti Māori says it's going to have its own alternative independent hearing in May so that people can understand what it is to be Māori and to have tikanga in this place, in Parliament. Doesn't that undermine the whole reason for Parliament for being, the single New Zealand House for running the country?
Well, 2 points. One is it's not. It is a single house, but it doesn't portray what we are as a country, in my experience, and at least a treaty-based element to it that allows for tikanga Māori to have a place within Parliament, and it has from time to time, and it has been accepted by various speakers. For some reason, it's not this time. That's the first point. The second point is around an independent inquiry. I mean, for all intents and purposes, like many efforts that have been done by Māori people in our history, that we run our own independent processes in order to make a point about the wrongs that have been put in the public arena. Is anything going to come of it? Probably not, because it's independent. It's a report. Does Parliament have to listen to it? No. Is it an opportunity for the issues to be put in front of the public if the media are present? Yes. Will it make any difference in the end to how Parliament is run? Probably not. So, in a sense, what it is about simply raising the issue in the public arena. I hope to show the inconsistencies of what happened and the shortcomings of our Parliament in terms of acknowledgement of things Māori when we talk about a treaty relationship and have the Treaty of Waitangi in our oaths. In reality, it's just not the facts.
The Labour MP, Penny Henare, he was the fourth MP. He went before the Privileges Committee, accepted he breached the rules, he apologised.
I think if we honour the institution of Parliament, we come here to do a job. I do think they should look towards attending. I mean, I did, and I stand by my decision to do so. And the sooner you get it done, you've got the opportunity to continue to fight for things our people care about right now. Hasn't
he got a point?
Well, there's a couple of things in there. One, yes, you are bound by some rules, but at least in challenging the rules, the party, these people have made a statement to the country that actually it's all one-sided in one sense. If you're in there, of course, you do have to follow the rules, and you can get on and carry on with the processes within Parliament. Does it change anything? No, not really. I mean, in the end, so often and throughout our history, Māori, and many people would have seen it, that the last chance is to fall back to protest as a means to highlighting the issues. I mean, this element of a sort of monocultural view of the parliamentary processes, it's a part of the institution from its very beginnings, back in 1850, whatever it was. And so, and Māori have had very limited, not opportunities, because the opportunities have been there, but the system itself denies Māori an opportunity to be able to bring a different perspective. And I don't know why Penny apologised for doing the haka, because it is a part of who we are. It must be a part of who he is because he did it, but acknowledging that there are rules. But how about we look at the rules and see where there can't be movement made to allow for a cultural practice? And as I say, haka is not new in Parliament, for goodness sake.
So what if the rules of the House were reviewed to include tikanga? What does that mean? Cowan Jones lectures in Māori laws and philosophy at Te Wānanga o Raukawa.
As my colleague Ani Mikaere would describe it as, tikanga is the first law of Aotearoa. It really talks about the right way of responding or behaving in any situation is. So it's a kind of collection of principles and practices and knowledge that determines what the right course of action is.
In this case, how do you see that working?
Yeah, so I think it's quite a tricky situation because you've got an institution which is not really grounded in tikanga, but perhaps trying to work with ways of incorporating aspects of tikanga. So the first thing I'd say is that actually I think there needs to be a much bigger conversation around the kind of some of the fundamental structure of the way in which we organise our representative democracy in a way which better takes account of tikanga. But that's a much bigger question. But I think that would make it easier then to see the ways in which tikanga could operate within that context. So at the moment, of course, what's sort of being talked about or being asked for is to try and think about, well, what are some of the things that might better recognise particularly the Indigenous people of Aotearoa, thinking about Māori communities, what might better recognise the ways of operating and behaving that are seen to be appropriate in Māori context, and can we incorporate some of that within the House or the practices of Parliament? And I think that's ultimately one part of understanding that we should be thinking about Parliament as making space for diversity and accommodating diversity. And I think what better place to begin than to think about how we manage the Indigenous law practices within the House.
There has to be a point, though, where Parliament is recognised by MPs as the single New Zealand house for running the country, doesn't it? I mean, what I'm trying to say here, I suppose, is the way Te Pāti Māori are approaching this, doesn't it undermine the whole reason for Parliament?
Well, I think, we can certainly understand that a single institution might well have a range of alternative processes that sit within it, and Parliament already does that. And I think part of the question would be, well, is there space in there to think about room for Māori roles, processes and procedures within that single institution? But what I think really does undermine Parliament's ability to act as a single representative body would be an unwillingness to respond to diversity and accommodate diversity and recognise that, and then particularly to refuse to respond to thinking about Māori and Indigenous ways of operating in the House. They may well take the view that, they actually can't do their job properly. They can't represent their communities effectively if the institution is unwilling to recognise Māori ways of doing things and Māori ways of expressing ideas and Māori ways of expressing concern about particular issues.
Do you worry about the consequences of this, Cowan? I mean, it's serious, isn't it? As Judith Collins says, this is a very serious matter and they've got one more chance. But, given the world that we're in and and I guess the racial tensions that are going on in New Zealand right now, do you worry that this is going to make things worse?
Well, I do think that what will make things worse is Parliament's continued refusal to accommodate diversity in those kinds of ways, because I see that as really the only way that Parliament can regain its legitimacy. And so, and this comes off the back of a week where we've seen hundreds of thousands of submissions on the Treaty Principles Bill that have not been able to have proper consideration by the Select Committee. So I think actions like that also speak to, well, how is the Parliament recognising and respecting Māori rights and concerns?
We will be offering one final chance to appear individually, to be questioned and to make any statements they wish to make.
I doubt that the Privileges Committee, because it's very powerful, will back down, and it's got rules on its side in a sense. And so in the end it will be, I suppose, that the Māori Party MPs they'll have to either suffer the consequences of their actions, because that's what happens every time either the Speaker makes a ruling or there are determinations made by Parliament. So there are consequences, I'm sure, that they're aware of, and they do this action, I suppose, to force something to happen. I don't, in my heart, believe that the Privileges Committee will back off on it, because there's too much riding in it, and a bigger statement has been made. The hope would be that you could negotiate through some of this stuff, but personally I don't think it's going to happen. There's the sort of things that people have got to address, because it's more than just doing the haka. There's a number of things going on here. That's not the first case. I mean, indeed, a couple of months ago, one of our iwi whakatoa here in their claims stood up to do a karakia, and it was cut off. I mean, what harm is there when this stuff can be negotiated? What harm is there in this allowance of Māori tikanga to take place in the Parliament of this land, of whom Māori are tangata whenua?
So what do you think is going to happen here, Peter, with this standoff? Something has to happen.
That's a very good question. There's something's going to break the deadlock over the standoff. I suspect in the end some form of rapprochement will be attempted, whereby if the Maori Party or its representative at least gets to make some form of submission to the committee in mitigation of their situation. I'd be very surprised if they did a complete back down and said, yes, okay, we'll go along with all of this. But I think just in terms of the process moving forward, there's got to be some change. If it doesn't, and the committee's in an invidious position, if it takes a hard line, it's going to be criticised for going too far without the opportunity for Te Pāti Māori to present its case. If it takes a soft line because it doesn't want to inflame things further, then it will be seen as weak and non-responsive to the concern that was raised when the original breach of privileges was raised. So they've got to tread warily as well. I think there'll be work done to try and get Te Pāti Māori to front in some form for at least some stage of the hearings.
As for the one the Privileges Committee wanted to lock away,
I'm not going to name names. It was a journalist, actually, and it was over a time when there was an issue some years ago where parliamentarians got a salary increase just before Christmas, and television news and various media hyped it up, and television played a clip of MPs laughing uproariously at something else while the story was being reported, implying that the news of the salary increase was greeted with great joy and sort of laughter, etc., when actually the two events were totally unrelated. So the committee briefly toyed with the idea of sort of making an example of someone by locking them up overnight, but the problem was we had nowhere to lock them up.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Phil Benj. Thanks to Carwyn Jones, Peter Dunn and Te Ururoa Flavel. I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Ka kite.